working? Yeah, it's working. Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello, my name is Shamta Hunter, and on behalf of the UBC Sustainability Initiative, I'd like to welcome you to UBC Reads Sustainability. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral, unceded, and traditional land of the Musqueam peoples. Also, to let you know, the washrooms are just outside these doors towards your right. After the main talk, we ask that you please hold on. Oops. Hold on to your questions until the end of the talk. Professor Patel has also agreed to stay afterwards to sign some books. The UBC bookstore is outside to sell some books as well. Hello. Sorry. Hello? No. Hello, hello, hello. Yeah.
Test, 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 test.
The problem is not, like, I'm getting it into the board. It's the
Test.
speakers.
Oh, it's their setup.
Yeah.
It's theirs. Yeah, we're coming through. It's their system. So we got to get an AV guy.
Sorry, folks. We'll just take 2 minutes to figure out this technical glitch. We'll be back. Do I?
We're getting the audio from them forward into the room system.
Yes, it's not.
Yeah, it's Thomas. He has to be.
How does the sound get into the system?
Through here. So it's coming in fine on my thing.
Right, okay.
It's just. So Kevin went to their thing, and for some reason, their whole thing went on mute. So the last time I was here. Testing, testing, testing.
All right, we are back. So I was saying, please hold on to your questions until after the main talk. And Professor Patel has also agreed to stay afterwards to sign some books. The UBC bookstore is outside. It's free entertainment.
Test, test. Test, 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 test. Okay, great. Testing, testing, testing. Okay, so it's coming into the board. Check, check, check. All right. Test, test, test. Test, 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 test. Well, 1, 2. Huh. What happened? What happened to the system?
It just rebooted itself.
Huh.
So they tried to put it in state of the art, and it's not tested, sealed at all.
Huh.
We've been in here once before, and it's not. We tried to do everything ourselves. The smart system, our stuff is working. It's like, it's exasperating, but that's.
Yeah.
I'd recommend never doing another one in this room. Not in this building.
Hmm.
This building is terrible.
This new state-of-the-art building.
Yeah, the new state-of-the-art building is.
Test, test, test.
Yeah, because we have nothing.
Do you think we gave it too much?
Yeah, I think we did, and it muted it on that end. Because when I adjusted the volume on that end, it started working again.
Yeah.
So.
On his console?
No, on the actual system.
Right, okay.
So it muted it, so we shouldn't go any hotter than that.
But why the second time did it? I don't remember raising it. I think I raised this one.
No, I did.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of feedback, and then it just clicked on.
Okay. Do you hear anything? I don't hear anything. Thomas? No. Well. Any day now. Check, check, check. Okay. Is it live? Oh, okay, we're back. You could try that mic there. Try that. Try the, yeah.
Hello? 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 Hello?
Yeah. Testing, testing. Okay, so this
Hello?
one's working.
Hello? Yeah? Okay.
Okay.
All right, let's try it one more time. Like I said, the UBC bookstore is outside selling some of his books, so if you want to buy one and get it signed by Professor Patel, please do so after the talk. Now, I would like to introduce or invite Dr. Whitman, Hannah Whitman, to the stage to welcome Dr. Patel. Dr. Whitman is the Associate Director of UBC's Center for Sustainable Food Systems at the UBC Farm and Associate Professor in the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. Her research program is focused on food sovereignty, farmland access, and agrarian citizenship in Canada, Ecuador, and Brazil. Hannah?
Thank you, Shamta, and thank all of you for coming and for your patience. And thank you to the AMS for this beautiful space, which is still working out. It's in its first year of existence here. So I'll be brief in my introduction of Raj because I'm sure you'd much rather hear what he has to say. But I do want to thank our sponsors for this event. UBC Reads Sustainability is the main organizer, and this event has been supported by the Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies, the AMS Sustainability, the Liu Institute for Global Affairs, and the Center for Sustainable Food Systems and UBC Farm. And we were really excited to welcome Raj here to speak with our graduate students this morning about their work on food sovereignty and food justice all over the world and the projects that they're doing. So I'll introduce Dr. Raj Patel. He is an interdisciplinary scholar and a systems thinker. He is an organic intellectual who speaks out loudly for food justice across the world. He has degrees from the University of Oxford, the London School of Economics, and Cornell University, where I first met him as a graduate student quite a while ago. Raj is also a frequent media contributor. He writes for the Financial Times, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and many other radio, print, and online venues. So I highly encourage you after this talk, if you're interested to hear more, to go online, and there's lots to see and listen to there. He is the author and editor of 5 books. 2 of those are for sale outside. The Stuffed and Starved is called Stuffed and Starved, the Hidden Battle for the World Food System. It's used widely in university courses. So many of our students have read this book and learned from it as a really very readable and very energizing look at the underbelly of the food system and also some of the inspirational stories that are working to change the system we have today. So in these key works and in public discourse, Raj has made key contributions to thinking about food sovereignty and world food governance, in part by unpacking and critically examining most of our common assumptions about where in the world our food comes from, who grows it, who controls what we eat, and how and what we eat. So this renewed look at power relations in the food system helps shine a light on these hidden alternatives to resolving the persistent problem of hunger and environmental degradation, and those solutions which come out of that, which are proposed by people and communities on the ground. So Raj's most recent project, Generation Food, which he'll tell you more about today, shares how people from around the world will demonstrate resilience and wisdom to set the table for themselves. So we're going to see some of that today. I want to welcome Raj and thank you for coming, and we'll look forward to your questions after the talk.
Hello. Now we're going to have audio-visual fun and games here while I try and get this pointing in the right direction. Can you hear me at the back? More or less. Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you all for coming today. Thank you, sponsors, for making it possible for me to be here. And, of course, the Musqueam Nation for hosting us on this unceded land. The title of today's talk, which I got wrong up there, is how the world will eat in the future. And to answer that question, I want to talk about how the world has eaten in the past. And so what we're going to do is go back to the beginning of capitalism and then I teach a course at the University of Texas at Austin, and the course is The World Food System from 1450 to 2050. And it takes 12 weeks, and it's long and 3 hours a session. And so we're going to compress that into about 45 minutes. So I'm going to go fast, and there'll be, but save your questions. We'll have plenty of time. So today's presentation is brought to you without the color yellow. Unfortunately, this is meant to be a sort of warm, woody color. And it's not. So I apologize for that, but if you can just insert the color yellow, that would be great. Do you know, because of climate change, our skies are getting more yellow. I shit you not. This is a finding. Because of what we've done to the climate, we will never see the kind of deep, dark blues, and our children will never see the kind of deep, dark blues that our ancestors once did. And so just bring a memory of the color yellow and project it onto that screen, if you would. Now, let's start from the very beginning. Portugal. In the long version of this course, we talk about the sort of prehistory of modern capitalism and talk about climate change and death and disease. There's never enough time to talk about this stuff. Instead, what I want to talk about is Portugal, because Portugal is, as you can see, this is a sort of map of where Portugal goes to colonize. It's the first colonial power, and one of the first stops in Portuguese colonial adventure is Madeira. The island of Madeira, the island of trees. Now, this is Madeira today, and what's very interesting about this place is it's called the island of trees, and it becomes it's a crucible for modern capitalism. And I want to tell you the story of Madeira very briefly. The island of trees, the Portuguese get there, and they realize. They see it from afar. They see a ton of trees. They start chopping the trees down and sending the trees home for use as lumber, as a construction material in Lisbon and in sort of colonially important places. And they grow wheat and they send that back. And then they discover, wait a minute, look, if we go to the center of the island and try and channel down some water, if we bring indigenous people that we have enslaved from our colonial adventures in the Canary Islands, then we can channel water down, and we won't grow wheat. We'll grow this amazing commodity crop for which we can get just a crap ton of money. And this commodity crop, the world's first commodity crop, was sugar, exactly. So they come down and they grow sugarcane, and they apply indigenous people's labor, and then when they die, slaves brought from northern Africa. They make this function because they've got credit from bankers in Flanders and in Genoa. and the workforce is brought over. They're sustained through the reproductive labor of women who have written out of this story, and their sugar is sent off to Europe. And on the island, the trees stop being things that you use as construction material, and they now use the trees for fuel. Because sugarcane, these long grass stalks. The way sugarcane is made is basically you have 24 hours between peak sugar in the sugarcane and when it starts to decay. So you need slave labor to chop it down. They take it to the first industrial facilities for processing. The trees stop becoming construction material and they become fuel. And so the trees are then used for fuel to distill the sugar liquor down into crystallized sugar. All happens in 24 hours. And what's interesting about this story is that it has everything that modern capitalism needs. It has cheap workers. It has cheap nature. It has cheap fuel. It has cheap food for the workers. The sugar itself is a commodity that the workers might steal, but essentially they're not eating that sugar. That's being exported off to Europe. It's worth, it's the golden crop. And you have cheap reproductive labor. You have cheap credit in order to be able to make this all work, and you have cheap lives. You have a kind of supremacy, a Catholic supremacy in this case, that allows indigenous people and Africans to be enslaved and put to work, and you have the police that allows them to be, those lives to be monitored, for property rights to be monitored, and for rebellions to be put down. And this is a process where, all of a sudden, colonialism, capitalism, and food are all there right at the beginning. And so you have a world then which eventually Europe controls most of the planet. And I think it's just important to sort of stare at this for a little bit. Of course, it's the countries in yellow that haven't been under European control. You can't tell that. You have huge and very intricate commodity supplies. And you have chains of commodities that allow the supplying of certain kinds of food to certain kinds of places. And what happens at the frontier of capitalism also happens then within Europe itself. There's this sort of, there's a system whereby, although capitalism is pioneered in many ways in Madeira, it's also, its productivity and its ideas, its technologies are brought back to Europe. And so systems of land control, for example, are completely overridden. This is a patch of land where you see the sort of progression of property rights in Thurgarden, where from 1730 to the 1850s, you have first the commons, land that is held in common, where people govern the land and the resources together, and the progressive sort of the introduction of property rights. One of the big agricultural technologies is fencing. Right? Fences are a very important agricultural technology, and you see the introduction of that so that now you have modern agricultural technology, you have the kinds of space in which modern agricultural technology can work. And I mean, I think it's important to observe that for some people this works very well. There's a picture I like. The glory of this picture is lost, but actually, it does look more menacing without yellow, doesn't it? So this is a really important picture. It sort of captures a sort of signal moment in England in 1750. This is Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, a painting by Thomas Gainsborough. It's in the National Portrait Gallery in London. But it's super interesting, even though it looks horrible at the moment. This is a picture that sort of epitomizes what capitalist agriculture looked like. Because the dawn of capitalist agriculture is about cash crops. And when you have those cash crops, some people get incredibly rich. When you're involved in those international circuits of commodities, people get wealthy, including this man. Mr. Andrews he inherits a lot of wealth from his father. His father is a silversmith, an incredibly rich man who consolidates his property and marriage by marrying his son off to Mrs. Andrews here. And they own all of this. And all the technologies of modern agriculture are there. If you look here, you can see the fences. These used to be common lands, and now the fences have been put there, and the sheep who have driven the peasants away. You can't have sheep and peasants there sort of coexisting at the same time in terms of a sustainable agriculture system. So the sheep are the replacement for the peasantry. The peasantry have been booted off the land. There are no workers here, but you see the fruits of their labor. You see sort of bushels of corn here. You see nice straight rows of crops. Those rows will have been put there using cutting-edge agricultural technology. This guy, Mr. Andrews, he was an agricultural pioneer. He has several articles in the agricultural journals of his day, and he planted all this using probably a seed drill, the seed drill invented by Jethro Tull, that's my Jethro Tull joke. In some audiences, you hear Jethro Tull and you think 70s prog rock, but what you need to be thinking is the seed drill. But this is sort of the Monsanto of its day. The seed drill actually doesn't become popular till 1850, but he's experimenting with it right now. But also what's interesting about this story is the difference between Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. Mr. Andrews, look at him. I mean, he's sort of foppish, isn't he? He's sort of, yeah. I mean, this is as casual as it is possible for a man to be in public while still wearing clothes in 1750. I mean, he's what he's wearing. I mean, that's a sort of shooting outfit, but it's undone, and he's sort of flopping all over the place. He's like, screw it, I own all this, and I'm brilliant. He has that, one of the reasons why he looks so foppish is because he and Thomas Gainsborough went to school together, and Gainsborough hated him. So that's why he looks like a tosser there, is because Gainsborough didn't like it. But what's interesting also is Mrs. Andrews. Compared to Mr. Andrews, Mrs. Andrews is absolutely upright, and she's dressed very well. And then, in fact, there's a little hole in the canvas there. There's an unfinished part where either she was going to be plucking a pheasant shot by Mr. Andrews' gun and his faithful dog. Well, the gun didn't, the dog doesn't do the shooting, but retrieves the bird and gives it back to his mistress. Or there was going to be a junior Andrews there. But either way, the way that this picture has been interpreted is that this is a painting about ownership. Because under modern capitalist farming practices, Mr. Andrews owns all the land and the technology and his dog and his gun and his wife. And the way in which modern capitalism sits on top of patriarchy and reinforces it and has select roles for women, it reverberates through history. And we're going to come back and touch on that in a second. Meantime, though, let's take stock. We have a world now where you have these commodity chains all over the place. You have people in 1750 talking about the English malady. Round about this time, there are dozens and dozens of how-to books about how to eat. One of the most famous ones is called The English Malady by a guy called, what's his name? Robert Cheney. The idea of the English malady is obesity. Right? For a certain class in England, this class, obesity is a present danger because they're eating such rich diets. And also people are confused about what to eat. And there's so many new things coming from abroad. Potatoes, for example, these strange, weird crop from Peru, and no one really knows what they are, and they're very suspicious of them. And so the British deploy a cooking technique that they've used with great alacrity ever since, boiling. So they boiled the living crap out of it, and then you can find that cooking technique alive and well in Britain now. But I mean, what's interesting is we live in that time now, right? Everything about this is alive today. Property rights, certain domination over nature, the erasure of workers, the ejection of the peasantry, and also confusion about what to eat from Peru. I mean, raise your hands if you had quinoa, if you've eaten quinoa. Raise your hands if you had 10 years ago eaten quinoa. Okay, a couple of foodies, but basically, quinoa is this strange mystery crop. How is it that you got to know about that? How is it that the strange, weird stuff that tastes like grit all of a sudden becomes a superfood and the thing to eat? It's a similar process, right? We have sort of these commodity chains stretching across the world. We have experts telling you what to eat, and you have, I mean, the case here, and we can go into this more in questions, is that we set up a system of nutritional bafflement, the creation of perplexed consumers, but we also have these relations of domination on which the food system sits. And one of the astute observers of that was this man. Quick sort of show, have you heard of Thomas Robert Malthus? You raise your hands if you have. I mean, if you haven't, every armchair catastrophist relies on Thomas Malthus to be able to make his arguments. And basically the idea that Malthus has, that you may be familiar with, is this. The idea here is, look, the amount of food that we can eke from the land can only increase at a geometric rate. You know, you've got your acre, and you can get maybe a couple bushels more from that acre every year. Just a bushel or two. Well, a bushel is quite a lot. But so, you're getting just an incremental amount every year on your land. But unfortunately, humans reproduce at a geometric rate. And so people beget people who begets the polite word. There's a lot of shagging. And so people are shagging, and then their children are shagging, I mean, when they grow up, and then they shag and they produce more. And so you have, dozens and dozens and dozens of people, and all of a sudden you reach a point of catastrophe right here. And then you're in trouble, because after that there's a disaster, you have a population crash. So the thing about this graph is, even when it came out, people pushed back, and they said, look, Malthus, just because people can be bad doesn't mean they will, right? I've just turned that off. It's not, yeah, that was me, so I can turn it back on again. It's like, no, this is the, all right, you look at the graph, now look at me. The graph? Okay, all right, no, thank you, Hannah, that's very sweet of you, though. So no, look at me. So the idea here is that basically people said, Malthus, you're crazy, because we're governed more by our, the growling in our stomachs and the raging of our genitals. Human beings are capable of being better than that. And Malthus had a more subtle argument. And his argument actually depended on this guy, Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, Malthus was a Rousseauist. In fact, when Malthus was 6 weeks old, he was visited by Jean-Jacques Rousseau and David Hume. John Maynard Keynes called them his fairy godmothers. And he grew up, his father, Daniel Malthus, was one of the big Rousseauists of the time. And so he has a Rousseauian argument, which says, look, it's true that people could, it could be that human beings are beings of light and rainbows and kittens and happiness. It could be that we are perfectible, wonderful beings. The trouble is that the relationships that we set up between the country and the city, the way that the country sends its luxuries for consumption into the city, the luxuries in the city corrupt everyone. It's not just people in the city, it corrupts everyone. The system makes us all bad. And therefore, it could be that human beings are perfectible, but we will never know, because the economy and the systems of domination that we've set up between country and city corrupt everyone. Now, that's a much more subtle Malthusian argument. But it's because of that argument then that we're governed by our basest instincts. So Malthus has a response, and it's a good one. His response is, look, you may not think that you're governed by your need to eat and shag, but because the economy brings out the worst in you, you will. And you will try and be better than that, and you will be brought low by the economy. You'll be brought low by, this is the luxury debate. It's a really important debate. It spawns modern disciplines of economics and a range of other sort of social scientific insights. But it's a live question, and it's one to remember. So when you think about Malthus as being the crazy guy who thinks about collapse, think much more about the economic argument, because everyone's forgotten it. Now, that's important because the idea of society and everyone going for each other, and the worry about what happens with collapse is tremendously important. It fuels agricultural innovation even through the 20th century. It fueled the Green Revolution. Just a quick thing about the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution. Does anyone know why it was called the Green Revolution? I'll give you a multiple choice. Was it Green Revolution because there was a lot of green involved? Because it was an environmental improvement? Because it resulted in a lot more green fields? Or because it wasn't red or white? Or because it emphasized soy and hemp production? Take a guess. So we go, number 1, raise your hand. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. In your dreams, is it about hemp? No, the correct reason is because it wasn't red or white. Let me, sorry, I'm being invited to join the UBC network here. This is, fuck, you can't read it because it's all, anyway. This is the quote through which the Green Revolution, the term Green Revolution comes. And it's offered by William Gowd, the USAID administrator, and he talks about the Green Revolution, which is about subsidies, it's about birth control, and it's about fertilizer and irrigation. He says, these and other developments in the field of agriculture contain the makings of a new revolution. It is not a violent red revolution like that of the Soviets, nor it's a white revolution like that of the Shah of Iran. I call it the Green Revolution. So it's a green revolution because what's going on in the back of William Gowd's mind and in the back of the Rockefeller Foundation and a range of actors is what happens after this point of Malthusian collapse. You know, let me go back here because here. So in the 1960s, they thought that this point of collapse would happen in 1985. They thought that there would be this Malthusian collapse, and they worried that after this point, after this sort of moment of collapse, everyone would become communist. Because they're not worried about them having too much sex, but they're worried about the working class. They're worried about urban poor people becoming hungry and then taking over. And there's plenty of evidence, there's plenty of reason for them to be thinking that. They've got the Soviet Union, they've got China, they've got, the Cold War is on. And so Malthusian ideas become these sort of represented in this sort of strange crucible. So this is to say the Green Revolution was spurred, this idea of agricultural technologies and irrigation and what have you. And to some extent, it results in the avoidance of this population collapse and this catastrophe. There's more food supply, and it outstrips population. And it's done not to feed the world, but it's done to specifically about preventing people in urban areas from rioting. That's the idea behind the Green Revolution, right? The idea of the Green Revolution is to have cheap crops so that people will have cheap bread in the cities and they won't riot. That's the only logic of the Green Revolution that you need to know. And they work in being able to produce more of these cereal crops. But it's never about saving rural people. It's not really about fighting poverty. It's about just making sure that there's enough cheap food so that cheap workers can work on cheap nature using cheap fuel in a system of cheap lives, cheap reproductive labor, and cheap debt to be able to produce the cheap consumer goods that we rely on. Okay? Now, that's the story, and of course it's starting to falter. If we look in India right now, we have stories where people's income, where real GDP per capita is going up, but average calories is falling because people can't afford it. You're thrown off the land, you're sent to the cities, you have to buy food, and incomes for the cheap workers, that means that there's a lot of unemployment, a lot of underemployment, a lot of living in shacks. That means that the amount of calories available is going down for the very poorest. So we're reaching a sort of crisis point when it comes to cheap food in some areas. And of course, this is indicative of the bigger crisis, the bigger global crisis around food. I think this graph is very interesting. It's obviously all the colors are wrong again, but this graph is fascinating. I was pointed to it by the head of sustainability at Nestle, it was put together by the bomb-throwing anarchists at KPMG. And what they did, the guys at KPMG and maybe the occasional woman, what they did was observe that. Every industry has environmental costs associated with it. So let's look at the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry has profits of $670 billion, and by some very conservative estimates, because obviously they destroyed the planet, but if you put a price on some of those, you get 23% of their profits are in fact environmental cost. So the percentage there is the blue band, the blue bar is how much of their profits is due to is an externality. And for every industry there's a large externality, but it's, you could still end up with a profitable industry if you internalize those externalities in every industry except food. In food, profits are 89 billion and environmental damage is 224% of profit. The modern food system is designed, the modern capitalist food system is designed to externalize environmental costs to such an extent that even if you work at KPMG, you can't do the math to make it work so that there's a sustainable way of having a food business that we have at the moment. And this is the origins, this is the end game of the story from Madeira. Because Madeira was all about cheap fuel, cheap nature, externalizing costs, externalizing social costs. And this is what it looks like. And we could talk about this relationship with other forms of food and domination. But given the time now, what I want to do is, the structure of this talk is, everything is very bad, but here's how wonderful it's going to be in the future. And I have none of that. In part because, this is the struggle with being an activist, where you want to provide the uplift, but you can't tell fairy tales. It's wrong to do that. It's wrong to say, and everything can end happily ever after if only we just do this one thing or these few things. It's going to be difficult. And that's the story I want to tell. That's a story where I'm working with Steve James. He's an amazing director. He did a fantastic film in the United States called Hoop Dreams, which is about struggles around that faced African-American young men who wanted to become NBA stars. And he films over the long durée, 4 years, 5 years of filming to be able to come up with these films. And we've been filming for about that long as well. And there's never they're never tidy movies. But their messiness is all the more, I think it makes the inspiration all the more palpable. So let me share a story that I've been working on with my colleague Rachel Besner-Kerr and her friends and colleagues, now my friends and colleagues in Malawi, the Soils, Food and Healthy Communities Initiative. So Malawi in the year 2000, let's talk about Malawi in the year 2000. Life expectancy was 46 years old, the HIV/AIDS prevalence 14%. Malnutrition for children was, and this means stunting, was at 55%. And stunting is what happens when you're so deprived of nutrients in the first 1,000 days of life that your body can never fully reach its, where it would have been. And GDP per capita was less than $1 per person per year. Things were tough. And in particular, things were tough in a neonatal rehabilitation unit in northern Malawi, where a nurse understood that actually what you needed to do, if you're interested in fighting malnutrition, what you need is better food, right? So the trouble is that what kids were eating mainly was corn, was maize. And so they needed, she needed to work with some farmers, and luckily Rachel Besner-Kerr was doing some work there, so she was able to get some money to be able to work with the farmers and with Esther Lupafia, who was the nurse in the neonatal rehabilitation unit. And they discover that they can have farmers being their own experimenters. I mean, the government wasn't going to pay for this. The government had been crippled by the World Bank and IMF debt regime. So there wasn't any money for agricultural extension experts. And so instead, Rachel, together with some other colleagues, brought seeds and helped farmers to become their own scientists. And they do amazing things. They bring cowpea and soybeans, and they bring things like the three sisters. You've got squash and beans and corn growing together. The squash attracting beneficial insects, shading out other weeds. The beans there providing nutrients for humans and for livestock, and fertilizing the soil. And of course maize to provide the starch that everyone knows and loves and wants. But here's a question. And this is something that the farmer research teams themselves saw coming. But it was possible, they saw, for there to be more food and for child malnutrition to increase. I mean, let's pretend that we're part of these farmer research teams. So how is it that you can have more food and infant malnutrition goes up? Have a guess. You've got more food, More coming out of the ground. It's right there. And children are malnourished. Why? Sorry, shout it out. Distribution. Well, no, because these are family plots. I mean, it's right there. How else? You've got amazing food coming out of the ground. Yes. So it's not sufficiently nutritious. Actually, this food is way more nutritious than the food that was being grown before. So that's not it. This is actually super nutritious food. Yes. It's too expensive. No, because this is homegrown. It's right there. It's for your own consumption. How can you have more food and child malnutrition goes up? Yes. They're exporting. Very good. But no, because this is because I mean a lot of these things like cowpea. There's not a huge export market. The Indians are coming into Malawi and buying up this tuor dal, and they would like there to be export. But this is all for domestic consumption. Yes, sir. Sorry. More shagging. No, and by which I take to mean that this is so successful there are more children being born. No, that's not it either. Last guess. Yes. Not their cultural food is the wrong answer, sadly. Look, the reason, because a lot of these are, some of these are traditional crops and some of them, there's something in what you say, madam, and we'll get to that in a second. But no, the reason that that you can have more food and for infant malnutrition to go up is that harvesting is women's work. But so is cooking and cleaning and carrying firewood and breastfeeding. And so when there's more harvesting to do, and you've got to cook, clean, and carry water and all the rest of it, what can suffer? It's breastfeeding and cooking. And that's how you can have increased malnutrition, is because this alternative to the Green Revolution exploits women's labor. So how do you fix that problem? Oh, take a guess. Get men to work. And get men to do what exactly? Get men to cook. Thank you. That's what they decided. How do you do that? How do you get men to cook? Anyone? Buy a grill. That is the best answer. Make them feel like they're making fire. Man, make fire, man. The trouble is, though, that after that, it's like, the man cooking thing is like, man make fire, man grill steak. But this is largely a vegetarian diet, so that won't work. And man grill soybeans it's not quite the same. So how do you get men to? Oh, I'm going to tell you. Fuck it. So the way that again, this is a really interesting experimental process. The way that they get men to cook first is by going door to door. It's the food network approach, where the food network. You're familiar with. This is the idea of you have an expert and someone from the farmer research team, and they go door to door and they say, "Man of the house, come out here. You've seen your wife hunched over this, haven't you? Yes, it's a pot." Oh, I've often wondered how that works. And so, and then there's this moment of like, here's how you do it, and isn't it lovely? And everyone's very excited, and the food is delicious. And then everyone, the sun sets, and everyone goes, "Oh, thank you very much. It's wonderful. I love the food." And then, of course, nothing changes. Because why would it? I mean, it's like the Food Network. Do you watch the Food Network to overturn patriarchy? No. No, I mean the Food Network's entertainment. You don't watch the Food Network to transform social relations. That's not what it's for. So then they have another thing called recipe days, where women and men compete to have the best and most nutritious food. And often the competition helps because this is about foods that are new and it's unusual. And they try and figure out new ways to cook soybeans, for example. Soybeans, they come from East Asia, but they're being used here to be able to boost nutrition. They're really exciting. Then you have women and men teaching each other, and men teaching other men, and it becomes a sort of prefigurative community, a space where equality is possible. And in that space of equality, some other organizing happens. Women call men out on our patriarchy, for example. it becomes a space where it's possible to do that. It's a space where women are able to, daughters will be able to call out their mothers-in-law on bad nutritional feeding practices. And so this idea of challenging patriarchy and reinventing culture through cooking and through the creation of a space of equality becomes really powerful. And then it's followed up by hard feminist organizing. And there's some really interesting transformations that happen. But what I'd like to do is maybe for you not to take my word for it, but I just want to show you a clip. This is about 5 minutes from the Generation Food Project shot over the past few years. And let me see if I can make it work. You'll have to forgive the fact that it's lacking yellow. But let's see if we can make this work.
Tanguika ko soda na tushuga pachoko waka na mafuta tangu tirapo pasi pachoko na tumchere taikako sota taikako vila mbweni tukubika pa moto
pasaizi kutapa vapsha mbwe tukutora mafuta tukubika pa moto pasifuria na kubika pa moto
mama tiri wakugondwa itela mama tiri wakugondwa
tindainjire mu bungwe chifukwa nkuwerezeka bungwe chifukwa ndikukwala ngekufumira mikoka yitu tikakhalanga mukusuzikira vose vintu kagwiranga ndini kwakuyana nawe tikupika kupenja dende kwali kulima uku kucherera kukaye natengevanya na kubeka inachereranga ndine mlenje kwako kuti tatola ku 2000 kuni nyimbo yose yakumanyuma vanga vakuti para ine nina nthumbo nyake mwana wali kumusana tacherera tose kumunda ndikuti pati fuma kumunda tikwenda iyo lanyani kwenda waka uchopo akambaka pano ndikuti pati tafika pano kanyumba mbwenu akukhala waka pampando hapo chete kweni kwa sono na mutikanjira mubungwe vakatisamiza vagenda kuti mwanalume angagwira ntchito za chanakazi. Mbuto hii ni za soni ni ilamukapoka kwa imwesha kweni icho chikumbika nchauti nge mungalimbikiranga nanga uli kamba choko udongo linga sintha nyengo ineyo icha
watuona watumulanyithu tukukwe vivili monadi kweni kuno kwitu ndikutanga takhalira
kuno mwakhalira nadi ndipo swapo vikusuzika chomene kuno mwanyitu mwanalume chigaa chinu chitu chakubwavo ngovipulikisika makoracha vagenda ngenganira tikayanga po daziro pala mulamu muchari kukaika
isi tingakwanisi kana dumwe sanga watereka nkhari
kwechi kwacha kusuzera ya mulamu chikwacha kusuzera mungachepe chamba
so wanyani vafika utata mchezo kana bwe sanga kuti ninafukaza bwenini ndi ngone kwe icho chujipikira mwanakazi wali para nani
ya ivangaseka ya mulamu kutola mukuona mulamu oro mu bible viri kulembeka kuti nikupangirenge movwiri uyu wakalenga Adamu chiuta akalenga Adamu nakuyoya kuti wakasanga kuti munthu lawa naphukwa uchitachita wakukhalakhala kuti nikupangire pa mauviri munthu wakuti wakuuvirengepo mwanakazi dangu lake ni isi tiwa uviri va inu nandi
so kuti muleke vana nchakusuza lekani nilimbani peni papa kweniwa kuti mtimwane wafuma kuti ndikukapo kwenkhanana tikasopana ukapo ana nilekele njani siziko iyi iwo kuinga kakumowa mwakazi nango towa pa nyumba kweni mbwe ngasanga kuti ipo nikhale nilele vana vana kulekera vanyako vana vangakwanisika cha siziko ipa pakale inenga niko mvakana iwo ndio vashika vaonde kwa kavambula kuti kuyana na ina ni mvakana
There's a quote from Orson Welles that says, essentially, if you want a happy ending, it depends on where you end your story. And I wanted to end it there for this clip because it's just important to remember that this is struggle. That it's not easy. That there are no easy ways of confronting these kinds of social dynamics. But it's also important to, I mean, in another cut, in fact, the cut that we've got at the moment, we actually get to see Jennifer there, who ended that so sadly, actually becoming an independent woman. Her husband, Winston, doesn't ever come around. He has another wife with whom he makes off. But she ends up, and that's fine. For the purposes of this isn't couples therapy, this is women's empowerment. It ends up that she is now a leader and she is training other women in the village how to do agroecology and how to, she's now become a leader like her sister Anita. And it becomes a really important, just the way we tell stories as activists is just, this is a side note, but it's just important for me to say that we shouldn't claim any easy victories. And none of this is easy. But the data are interesting. I'm just going to end here by just suggesting that actually there are ways that we can push back against some of the strictures of capital. And one is just to look at how change has happened in Malawi. I mean, from 2000, where the rate was 55%, in general in Malawi it's dipped to over 40% still. But if you look at the neonatal rehabilitation unit admissions, the Soils, Food and Healthy Community Initiative has done really rather well. And those kinds of data where the number of kids going into the hospital because they are malnourished has plummeted. And it's plummeted because of organizing around gender, organizing around different ways of farming, but also organizing around credit and organizing around grain storage and organizing around healthcare and setting up their own micro-enterprises and doing a range of things where all of a sudden this community for less than $8 per person per year has transformed and has empowered itself. That's something to celebrate, it seems to me. But you only celebrate it and you only recognize it by first pushing back against the ideas of cheap credit, cheap nature, cheap work, cheap fuel, and a range of these other ideas so that, the example that matters in Malawi, it seems to me, matters here too. That's why it's important for me to end thinking about Malthus. Malthus obviously says, look, you've got, we've got children and they're producing children, and the economy brings out the worst in us. But what if we transform the economy? What if we transform the underlying rules that make that economy possible, that stop the exploitation of indigenous people, that stop the exploitation of people of color, that stop the exploitation of low caste workers in India, stop the exploitation of the peasants, and all of a sudden allow those people to be in charge and recognize that peasants can come up with some of the most fantastic ideas about transforming the economy. What if we did that? I mean, this isn't to romanticize the peasantry, but this is to say that in this place, it was possible for these peasants to become scientists, to develop peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, for them to with the right kind of support from the academy, to become powerful, and powerful not just in what it is they grew, but how it is they distributed it. And if that's possible in Malawi, surely that would be possible here. And that's a good point, I think, at which to end. Thank you. So now's the fun part, where you've suffered through audiovisual mayhem, and that's just me. And then, you know, the other bits and pieces. So let's talk. How should this work? Oh, there's a roving mic. Okay.
Hello. Because we are live streaming this event, I would pass on this mic, and if you can ask your question in the mic, that'll be great.
Be brave.
Maybe if you can line up here to ask questions, that's a really good idea.
I've intimidated you all into silence.
Thank you for that fantastic presentation. I really appreciated the way you incorporated art history into it with the painting, and I wonder if you could speak more to the role of visual and performative art in the way we feed ourselves in the future.
Oh, how exciting. What a great question. I certainly think that the idea of performance, I retweeted someone's fantastic idea of performance. It was the academic Valentine's hashtag. It's obviously a very academic thing, but the tweet was, "Roses are red, gender is performative, and what is it? Heteronormative romance, market-led romance is heteronormative." And that's such an inside baseball joke for performativity. But the idea of performance is very interesting, and performing gender is one of the things that you see enacted in a very interesting way in these recipe days. The recipe days are, I'm going to use this as a prop. So you saw a guy there performing gender in a very interesting way. So there was a guy at the recipe day who was pounding soybeans to make soy milk. And that's the gateway kind of thing, the gateway thing for men to do when they're first learning cooking, because it is like, I am the man, and I crush you, soybean, I make milk from you, and you see other men doing it. Like again, it's sort of like a really interesting performance of trying on what it is to be a man differently, but it's always like, oh, look at me, I'm being a woman, I'm making cooking. And you see these very interesting moments of performance, of discovering through physical theater, through the actions of cooking and of preparing soybeans and soy milk, a really different way of using your body and being a man and confronting patriarchy in the way that your body moves. So I think that idea of theater is really important. The idea of the prefigurative community as a space where you have equality is just a really exciting space for bodies to do different things that they don't normally do. So I think that's an interesting sort of element to it. But in terms of the visual arts, there's just so much of the visual. I mean, I have a whole sort of PowerPoint just using visual arts, a lot of European, but also sort of international art, where you can use it both to see how the artists are observing, like, there's a really interesting, there are a couple of Last Supper paintings that I think are very exciting. There's the Leonardo one, which everyone knows. It's like the disciples and no one else. And then there are a series of Tintoretto Last Suppers where all of a sudden, I think his first one is the Last Supper, and you have like the guys around the table. It's like, all right, disciple over here, disciple over, everyone, we're having the food. It's like a big selfie. And then Jesus in the middle. And then it pans out. And by the third Last Supper that Tintoretto does, Jesus and the guys are at this tiny table in a huge room where there are women and where there are children serving, and there's the work and the action of cooking. And I think that's that picture is a really interesting social commentary on the way that food is produced and the way that the Last Supper, this signal food event in Christianity, becomes contextualized in a social context. So I think the visual arts have a lot to say and always have had a lot to say about food and the way it's produced. There's no end to the way in which artists can contribute to help us interpret and reinterpret and reimagine what it is that we think of when, for example, we think of the Last Supper. Other questions?
If you can please stand up. I was told to stand up and ask the question.
Thank you so much for an amazingly exciting talk. I'm a great admirer of your work. When I used to teach here at UBC, some of your work was required reading.
Thank you, Alan.
I would appreciate if you explain your take between the relationship of your gender analysis and the current debate between agroecology on the one side and biotechnology as a solution for world hunger in the future.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Alejandro, and thank you for your work. Super interesting. Biotechnology is, hands up if do I need to explain GM? Raise your hand if you've not heard of GM crops or are a little confused about it. No one's brave enough. All right, one kind of. The thing to know about some of the GM crops that exist now is one of the reasons they're so successful in North America is because crop prices are so low that you need a crop that you can plant on your thousands of acres and then spray and get a second job, right? So the idea of GM crops is that Roundup Ready corn, for example, and Roundup Ready soybeans in particular. Roundup Ready soybeans are a really interesting crop, right? So you plant your soybeans, and then you basically call in the Air Force, right? You get a crop sprayer to spray it, and then while that's happening, you're working at the post office or wherever it is that you need to be able to get the second, the income stream in order to be able to pay the bills, right? GM crops are often sold as a package of, you've got the Roundup Ready soybeans, and you've Roundup, this broad spectrum herbicide that you spray that kills all the weeds except it kills everything, including the weeds, except your desired crop. So the package is meant to be Roundup Ready soybeans and Roundup, the spray. Right? Does that make sense? The idea is that they go together, but that's not all that's that's not really the package. The package is much bigger because you need farmers who are in debt, because otherwise they wouldn't buy these more expensive seeds. You need crop prices that are low, cheap food. Again, that's part of the package, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. You need subsidies in order to help farmers survive the debt. I mean, that's one of the key reasons for subsidies, is to help farmers survive debt. It's not to allow farmers to drive around in Bentleys. That's not really what it's about. You need the debt complex to be able to have your subsidies. And so all of a sudden, what looks like a package of just soybeans and herbicide actually is a huge social technology. I mean, it's a package of lots of things. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense just to have these two damn things together, right? And so one of the ways that La Via Campesina, for example, is pushing back, the international peasant movement is pushing back and saying, no, we don't want this sort of imperium. We want agroecology. We want the kinds of technologies that you see here, where farmers are empowered to be knowledgeable. Because with Roundup, with genetically modified crops, the idea is the technology is in the seed. So farmers are reduced to morons who all they have to do is read the damn instructions, spray, and bugger off and work somewhere else so that you can survive. But what agroecology is about recognizing knowledge. Now, often that knowledge is gendered. When it comes to thinking about what GM does is supplant knowledge that's often women's knowledge about farming and what grows well together and what works well in a garden. So already GM crops de-skill farmers, and in particular de-skill women farmers if they're the custodians of that kind of knowledge. But there's still this question about, well, so agroecology involves more work, it's more labor intensive. And this is apparently one of its merits, that it's more labor intensive, and therefore, that's what farmers have a lot of, is labor, and they have less capital, but they have labor. Isn't this a good thing? And I think that it's a question that needs to be asked, is actually, well, who does more labor then? We think of the family farm as this idealized unit, but it's important not to romanticize it. If the family farm is a mechanism through which women are exploited, then that doesn't seem to me very good. And that's been one of the interesting things about thinking of agroecology alongside its sort of political cognate of food sovereignty. The idea of food sovereignty is that communities need to control their destiny when it comes to food. And that sounds fabulous. But actually, in order for communities to be able to control their destiny, you need equality. You can't have communities controlling their destiny when only, when the majority of people in that community, when women aren't part of that decision making. So if we're serious about food sovereignty, then you need to have gender equality. You need women's empowerment. We need an end to patriarchy. But if we're serious about that, then you need the kinds of organizing that are happening here. And there's a Via Campesina bumper sticker. It's a very long, because Via Campesina, bless them, they have, they're good on the slogans, but they imagine bumpers are this long. But the bumper sticker is, what is it now? Agroecology without food sovereignty is just a technology. So, the idea of agroecology without food sovereignty, agroecology just becomes a way of doing things. And food sovereignty without agroecology distributes nothing, because unless you have the agroecology, really what you're distributing is the poisons and the toxins of the Green Revolution. So you need them both together. And I think that there's nothing inherent in agroecology that says, and gender equality will come. Food sovereignty is a process, and it's very, very interesting to see that. But I get that agroecology is also a series of experiments, and the idea of experimenting with the soil. And if you're a strict agroecologist, you may say, well, the social relations are part of what needs to be experimented with. But you can imagine, the agroecology division of some large corporation. I mean, you see the co-optation of agroecology as well now, where, because industrial agriculture is failing, people are saying, well, those agroecologists, they incorporate soil, it's a crop residue into the soil. We should do that. But it's possible, therefore, for this idea of agroecology, of growing things together in harmony, to be hijacked. And there's nothing inevitable about gender equality coming from that. You need the politics as well. Otherwise, you're just left with these techniques. And techniques can be applied in a patriarchal system very easily.
Hello. Thank you very much, Raj. My name is Dawn Morrison, and I am one of the women in my community, an indigenous from the Secwepemc Nation in the southern interior plateau of this province, so-called BC. And I was one of the women who was basically a slave most of my life, growing up with the impacts of Indian residential school in my family and community, and kind of the sad colonial history and a lot of trauma and stuff. But I'm also now working with an amazing group of women and a few brave men who have joined us in leading food sovereignty movement here in this part of the world, and looking at what that looks like in community action and research and policy proposals. And so, coming from that perspective as an Indigenous woman, I always find it interesting to look at different narratives and historical points of reference in which people talk about food sovereignty. And I find it especially interesting that you highlight some of that, the history, brief history, and some of the white men who basically shaped the Western scientific control of the agri-food system now through some of their thinking. So my question is around why did you choose 1450 as a historical point of reference for the context of your conversation today?
Thanks so much, Dawn, and thank you for the work that you do. I mean, I'm in awe, and I'm so pleased that you're here. It's a real honor for me that you're listening to me. What we like about 1450, about this Madeira moment, is that it's one of the first moments where you can bring the stories together about modern capitalism. And by situating it not in Europe, but as a moment in European colonialism, this ends up, it is a way of saying that if you imagine a sort of race-free capitalism, that's certainly not in capitalism's original DNA. And capitalism is one of the things that happens through colonialism. So it also, Madeira, and this is certainly through Jason W. Moore, who's my colleague in the work on this. His work on Madeira is really guiding the thinking of the book that we're working on together on this. But we like Madeira because it embodies. I mean, you can find the bits of capitalism that matter before 1450. You can find finance. You can find you can find colonial adventure, you can find a range of these things. But they come together in Madeira in a particular way where what we're seeing is that really what starts capitalism is when you grow food not to eat it, but to sell it. And no one who grows food on Madeira gets to eat the sugarcane. None of the workers get to touch it, except that when they're making it, or if they steal it. But there's something interesting about the dawn of capitalism as being the moment when you stop growing food and then selling a little bit of it, but mainly you eat it yourself, to you sell all your food and you rely on markets to be able to get it back to you. And that story, the idea that capitalism begins with the advent of cash crops that you don't eat, food that you grow not for your stomach right away, but you have to go through the market and go through these series of exchanges. Because essentially that's what capital is, right? Capital is not money. Capital is the series of exchanges that you go through. That's what capitalism is about, the exchange, not about the stuff, not about hoarding gold. They've had gold for ages. It's not about silver, it's not about anything. It's not about the money. It's about the processes of exchange and those relations of exchange. That's, I follow Comrade Marx in that. And that's why it seems to me that the cash crop and the nexus around the cash crop that's hidden. When you think about Madeira, you think about Madeira wine. But Madeira wine, interestingly, I think about Madeira wine because I'm a boozy alcoholic. But people know Madeira wine is kind of sweet wine. But they grow Madeira wine in Madeira 50 years after they grow the sugar, because it takes 50 years for them to burn the island down, basically. The sugar complex eats the island, and there aren't any trees left. So then they move towards growing grapes, and the grapes are turned into wine. But the barrels for the wine come from the New World. They don't come from Madeira because there's not enough damn wood there to be able to make the barrels for Madeira wine. But again, the reason to think about Madeira is both the fact that it has this sort of capitalist explosion, and then capitalism stays. It becomes a permanent process, and it articulates not just from Madeira, but it hinges back into Europe. Again, that's the idea that Malthus is talking about, and it's not just Malthus but Rousseau, about this idea about what happens at the frontier changes what happens in the metropole, if you like. So it's about a series of transformations all the way down, and I think that's why Madeira becomes an important. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. I took so many nuggets from your presentation, gender and how do we transform our economy. And if you were in power of all of global food policy, I guess I'm curious to think what would be your way that we would, from a policy perspective, at sort of a top level and at the community level, what would you prioritize as a way to move forward and help sort of transform our food system?
You don't want me in charge of anything. Honestly, I mean, as large a group as I'm entrusted with is about this many people standing in front of I can do a lecture. But in terms of food policy, I think one of the things about food sovereignty is it's about people making decisions themselves. But there are enough things that prevent that I would, if I were in charge of the world, I would, use antitrust laws to get rid of large corporations. I would, mandate gender equality in government. I would do debt cancellation and then think about reparations and talk about reparations and make reparations possible for colonialism, for climate debt, and for slavery. I mean, I think that's, these are things that need to be paid for, and that process of paying and that process of coming to terms with the politics on which, on the land on which we stand, of the legacy that we benefit from, I think is very important. And I think that knowing about colonialism, knowing about the debt that is owed, is really vital. And I think that it prevents solidarity from happening because, if we don't talk about reparations, if we don't talk about solidarity, then solidarity, I think, becomes very hard between communities. And we need that in order to be able to have food sovereignty. But it becomes hard where, the white English guy will come along to India and say, well, let's all get along now, shall we? And there's quite a lot where Indians might say, fuck off. I mean, how is it that you get to erase the past and just say, well, let's have a normal trading relationship and let bygones be bygones when so much of the subcontinent has been crippled by colonialism, and why, and of course there are legacies into the present where the divisions between Hindus and Christians and Muslims was architected by the British state, and which now has birthed a fascist government in India. So there are lots of reasons why there are lots of impediments to the kinds of flourishing of food sovereignty, some of which the world government, whatever they are, would be well placed to do. And I think these ideas of debt, of reparations, and of climate debt are really, really important. But I also I think that as world leader, that's probably all I do, and then I want to get involved in sort of conversations where we've sort of fleshed that out. I mean, I think that leveling the playing field is very important, but to do that we need a good sense of history and the damage that's been caused so far.
Hello, Raj.
Hello.
My name is Eduardo. I am originally from Costa Rica, and last thing I heard from my friends down there is that 80% of the food that we eat comes from the doors of Walmart.
80% of the food comes from Walmart?
Yes, wow. In Costa Rica. And I found it very curious that you brought up the Last Supper a few minutes ago, and because I'm quite intrigued by the figure of Jesus, and particularly one of the things that even the most secular and agnostic scholars agree is that he was an exorcist, that he delivered people from the power of evil. So I'm wondering, in addition to working for this mixed paradigm of food sovereignty and agroecology, and in light of that corporate takeover of the food system, if you are aware of creative experiments around the world of institutional exorcism.
Yes, that's a great question, and I have an answer. Before I deliver it, though, the example I want to give is from Brazil, and it's about a fight that's going on at the moment. Hannah, you might know the contours of this much better than I. But it's about how we school our children and into whose hands our children are being delivered when they are advertised to. So just a quick show of hands. Hands up if you are confused at all about what you should be eating. Is there anyone here who is not confused about what it is that they should be eating? Just a few of you. Oh wow, we have the people who are able to follow the axiom of eat food, mostly plants, and not too much. But even there, it's a mystery, right? What counts as food is, we can get into the minutiae of that. But the fact that most people here are confused about what to eat is not an accident. The confusion around what we should be eating isn't a bug in the modern food system, it's a feature. The modern food system is designed to overwhelm. I mean, if you Google what to eat, you'll get 1 million different answers, and that's overwhelming. I decided that. And so one of the problems, one of the ways in which the evil of modern food corporations operates is by marketing to children. Now, marketing is, as an economist, I can tell you that marketing is nothing other than the sharing of information. Right? As an economist, the model is that human beings are rational individuals, and all they need is information through which they will make their rational decision about what it is that they're going to put into their mouths. And that's what marketing's for. It's just a way of spreading information so that your consumer has more points through which they can make their reasoned assessment. But we're not rational consumers. And particularly, even if we were rational consumers, we understand that children are not rational. This is why we don't let them vote, and we don't let them carry guns, except in Texas. Are students allowed to bring guns to class at UBC? No? Apparently, as of the end of this semester, they will be in Texas, and that makes for a splendid teaching environment. I may be moving up here. So anyway, not distracted by the guns. There are other evils. Yeah, so the food corporation. When you market to children, there's no economic justification for that. And particularly when it comes to children wanting certain kinds of food, the marketing of food to children seems to me an evil, and an unambiguous one, because there's nothing about children's food preferences that needs to be respected when if it's endorsed by a clownfish or just a clown. Do you want a clown telling your children what to eat? No. If anyone's going to tell my children what to eat, I want to tell them, and that means restricting advertising to children. And the experiment that I'm excited about that's already holed up in legal wrangling is the initiative to ban all marketing of food to children and all marketing of anything to children in Brazil. And I'm kind of excited by that because it makes perfect sense. Why would you, again, the arguments for marketing are only as good as the idea that marketing is information. If it's not, if it's propaganda, then why are we allowing it to infect the minds of our children and turn them into the kinds of consumers whom the food industry will then be able to prey on? So that seems to me to be a moment where the food industry is, where the government is trying to protect children from an unambiguous evil. And then there comes the question, well, what do you fill in that gap? Because we've lost many of the ideas about how it is that we should be eating. And that's a political discussion that needs to be had. But it seems to me that many of the initiatives around school meals offer a moment where kids can connect to their food system and can connect to farmers in a way that's very exciting. And that reinvigorates and educates in a way that brings good rather than evil into their palates. So that seems to me to be an example where, because, why? In the United States, 1 in 3 children will develop type 2 diabetes, 1 in 2 children of color. And that's a lot of amputations and blindness and death that is being allowed, and we know why. And in 50 years from now, we will look back and see how we have poisoned our children and wonder how we ever let it happen. And so the idea that we can stop these corporations from getting into our kids' heads is a brilliant idea, and it seems to me an evil that we can stop.
Hi, I really appreciate your talk and the way you focused the example in Malawi on the gendered food systems and how capitalist agriculture is based on the exploitation of women. So I have a 2-part question. I'm actually from Malawi, so it doesn't feel like this relates necessarily to me, but in terms of general Canadian context, to what extent is outsourcing our examples of gendered labor, silencing other ways that gendered agricultural labor exists here in Canada? For example, the migrant farmers that come from Mexico and Latin America, all men, allowing us to eat local British Columbian food, for example. And my second question is how do you incorporate these multiple narratives of gendered food systems within your work in facilitating discussion and in your lectures? Because it's not just happening in the global south, it's very present here and in our backyards.
Thank you, those terrific questions, thank you. One of the reasons that I'm working with Steve on this film is because as a writer, I've noticed that there are fewer and fewer people who read books, which is sort of disheartening. Though I'm pleased that many of you have a book, one of mine, and with you, and I'm honoured and flattered, and I can sign that for you. No one reads, and of course, particularly if we're interested in growing the food movement, you have to meet people where they are, and that means working with groups who are working with people where they are. Because again, me, not an organizer, but this story, which again, I'm not sure it's fair to say, well, because I've shown Malawi, I didn't show Canada. it's, there's an opportunity cost in all of this. And what I like about this story is that it inverts a number of things, including the idea that peasants know what, the idea that peasants are stupid and Africans are mute and in need of help. And the reason that this film is, that we shot this particular thing is that it upends the idea of, well, we need to feed Africa because Africans can feed themselves. And I think that's one of the tropes that we're really going after here. And so it's not quite fair to say, but you didn't talk about the trope of how it is that this works locally. But what's interesting, I mean, for us, we're trying to take seriously the idea of how do you grow the food movement? I mean, we all know how to eat properly, or at least half a dozen people do, and we know how this works. But how do you grow that community? Because even if you're not interested in the food system is interested in you, and you are a profit center for the food system, no matter whether you can know and quote Michael Pollan or not. So what do you do about that? How do you organize? So one of the things we're doing is, in addition to, one of the struggles with being a documentary filmmaker, it turns out, is that no one watches documentaries either. There are, I mean, it's an order of magnitude more than read books, which is to say about 2 million people will watch a good documentary in the United States, which leaves lots of other people wondering what the hell's going on. So what we're doing is chunking out all of this stuff, working with faith movements, unions, cooperatives, and peasant movements, and the environmental movement more generally, to figure out what in this is useful. And so we come back from Malawi, we co-create then with faith-based movements, for example, who are very excited by this. Because there's Adam and Eve in there, in a starring role, but it's also about there is this sort of religious element, but there's also ideas about, well, so how do we translate this into what we're doing here? And it becomes a moment where you can chunk up the film into sort of organizational-sized bits and then organize around it. And so whether it's unions or churches or faith, whatever it is, we're trying to version this so that you don't have to go to the theater, but that it happens in a place that you go to every week, whether that place is a church or a union hall or a mosque or whatever it is, or your cooperative. And that's where good organizing always happens. So yes, you'll see this on YouTube, you might be able to see it in a cinema, but you probably won't. The place that you'll see some of this stuff, most of this stuff, will be where the organizing is happening. And so that's kind of the commitment that we've got about making sure that people see this, is to make sure that we make something that people want to see. And the only way to do that is to work with the movements directly, rather than saying, we come with a story from Malawi, take it and go. Because that kind of arrogance in filmmaking, it was possible when there were far fewer films and digital technology didn't allow everyone to be producing one. But now we're very committed to it being used. So there is this accountability and this kind of co-creation, and we're taking that very seriously. So does that answer the question? I mean, yeah.
Hello, Raj. Thank
Hello.
you for sharing so much with us. So kind of what I get from what you're saying is that each food system that is flawed has its own diagnosis. And in Malawi, it could be that patriarchy is ingrained. And in a general sense, you kind of mentioned modern capitalism and its flaws, like cheap labor, cheap nature, cheap fuel, all of these things as the kind of root causes of our food system failure. I wonder, what do you see as a place for entrepreneurship or innovations in business as a kind of challenge to that modern capitalism? And in that, how can marketing also be a tool for good change, for behavioral change and in a positive way that benefits our food system?
Thanks so much for that question. I mean, I like innovation. I like entrepreneurship. Again, this story in Malawi is so interesting because it has all of that. It's about people experimenting and being innovators. And what we didn't have time to get into there was Anita is also an entrepreneur. She makes climate change stoves, which is amazing feminist technology where, because women are the ones who have to carry the firewood, and because they've noticed that there's less and less firewood because of climate change, they've invented these things called climate change stoves. Well, they saw it somewhere else and they brought it up to northern Malawi. And basically it's little cylinders that are very rudimentary but still very effective stoves that cook with a much higher heat than an open fire does. It's a really simple, but it's really effective. And they've iterated it, and they've improved the design, and they're working on different kinds of clay to make it work better. And I think that what we need to remember is that with capitalism, if you like exchange, if you like innovation, if you like, communication, then capitalism is sort of the anti-market. Capitalism involves the concentration of power, reducing the number of people who can be innovative, reducing the number of people who can share their ideas, reducing the level of entrepreneurship to very narrow constraints. So I think that that's the other thing that as I say, I like about the Malawi example, but every example that we have has people who are being entrepreneurial. Who are trying to communicate ideas. I mean, perhaps the most direct one that might be of interest to you is in West Oakland. In West Oakland, the so-called food desert, it's not really a desert, I mean, there's plenty of food, it's just bad food, is resulting in some very high rates of type 2 diabetes and heart disease and diet-related disease. And so what's happening is people there have invested in a grocery store, and they're also militating for higher wages, and they're using the Fight for 15 language to be able to raise wages so that people can afford to eat well. You know, this is the conundrum the good food movement gets in. It's like, well, you want us to have, organic, organic vegetables, crafted and hewn by people who drive around in Porsches, and you need to pay for that. And of course, we do need to pay for that. And so one of the things that the food movement is about is not only raising the price of food to reflect its true cost, but making sure that everyone gets to eat. So fighting for higher wages, and I'm excited about the Vancouver Living Wage Initiative for that reason. But I think that's in that sort of environment, you actually encourage more innovation, and you make it possible for more people to be entrepreneurial, and you get to use information and the sharing of information much more radically. So there's nothing inherent in marketing that's poisonous, it seems to me, but the purposes for which it is used is. And I think that if you want marketing to be good, you have to have the system and the ends to which it is put being good, and that means not, for example, making profit off children. So that's why the marketing story for children is important. But I think we also need more people to be entrepreneurial. So I'm with you. I think that I'm all for entrepreneurship and rewarding it in ways that aren't necessarily about monopolies, but are societies have always figured out ways of rewarding the people who do good things. But it's not like, well, we'll give you a monopoly over this thing for the next 30 years plus death plus whatever it is. We don't have, societies haven't invented intellectual property as a way of rewarding people. Today in the drug industry, we're always told, well, without a monopoly there will be no innovation. But that's weird, right? It's strange. If the internet, for example, or penicillin, or a range of fantastic interventions in healthcare and in our modern lives happened without monopoly patents, but instead happened through recognition and rewards and prizes and a range of other things that mean that you don't need the money, but you get the recognition. And I think that's also a way that society needs to be reconfigured. We don't just reward everything by writing everyone a fat check.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your talk, and please allow me to rephrase the title of your talk, and it's that given that we are increasingly moving towards a highly urbanized world, I would like to ask you, how do you think that cities will be eating in the future, particularly in the developing world where most of this urban growth is going to be taking place? So I would like you to know also in particular your thoughts about urban agriculture and how urban agriculture could help feeding cities in the future or not.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. And it's important, I think, to recognize why it is that we have urbanization, right? I mean, it gets to that Malthusian, Rousseauist kind of question about the links between the country and the city. Why is it that people are kicked off why is it that cities grow? It's because they're kicked off the land in rural areas and sent, and then they come to the cities to find their fortune and increasingly can't. And so I wonder whether the idea of, well, how are we going to feed these mega cities? I mean, in the future, people won't live. I mean, when you think about feeding cities, people think of how do you feed Bombay or Tokyo or Shanghai? But in fact, people will live more in cities of around 1 million rather than these mega cities. And in those mega cities, I mean, we have a series of choices ahead of us, I think. I mean, one of the things of starting in Madeira and moving forward is that you get a sense of the arc of possibility through history. And it's possible to imagine cities existing through through city-states. You get to imagine cities existing through under fascist government. I don't think that the future of the way cities feed themselves is written in stone. I mean, you can imagine a way that cities feed themselves by having city police going out and beating the crap out of people in rural areas until they give up their food. I mean, there are ways in which cities can be very militaristic and parasitic on their rural hinterland. So that's one solution. It's not one that I'm in favor of, but the policing of rural areas to supply cities is certainly a way that our future could play out. I'm more in favor of the idea of dissolving the city a little bit more, and that means much more urban and peri-urban farming. The report that I like is the ISTAD report. It's the International Agricultural Assessment on Knowledge, Science and Technology for Development, ISTAD. Yeah, these people didn't go to acronym school, so it's just. But the idea of it is basically that if we're interested in a future where we are able to survive climate change and have climate-ready, not climate-ready agriculture, but an agriculture that is diversified enough for us not to depend on fossil fuels, then what we need is more urban and peri-urban farms. I mean, I don't think we can make it work just by farming every inch of land in the city. And we may not want that, because we might want land in the city for things like play, or to be able to think of other uses of open space. But I think more urban and peri-urban farming can feed cities in the future. We don't need the mega farms that we have at the moment. And since those mega farms are premised on cheap fossil fuel, cheap in the sense of managed where you can dump the expenses of the carbon from farming into the atmosphere with no consequence, then moving away from fossil fuels means relocalizing food systems. And so I certainly think urban agriculture has a part to play, but peri-urban agriculture as well, and rethinking those supply lines is important. But that means changing our diets. That means changing who we are. And that's the hard part, I think, is for us to imagine eating imperfect fruit and not having strawberries on tap all year round. It means reconfiguring the way we think of our, what it is that we want to eat, what should we have for dinner. Those questions need to be answered very differently, and we need to be prepared for those answers. And that makes it sound like, everything's crap. In the future, we're not going to be able to have strawberries all year round. We're not going to we will be given whatever it is that our peri-urban farm supplies us. But it needn't be that bad. One of the nice things about the food movement is that you can have pleasure. And I think this may be the moment at which we end. But one of the joys of urban and peri-urban agriculture is that it re-encourages an engagement with taste and with joy and with pleasure. And the food movement is not just about you must do this and do that and being incredibly boring, but it's also about here's the joy, here's the pleasure, here's the sensuality, and sensualism. I go for that. I like pleasure. It's one of the things I enjoy, and I think that's something to remember about the food movement. And about the joys of rediscovering ourselves. I mean, capitalism has attenuated that so much that we think that the pleasure that we get through fast food and these engineered foods is as good as it gets, and it's not. And part of the transition towards a more sustainable agriculture involves that difficult personal work and re-education around patriarchy, around race, around gender. But it also means re-educating our taste buds, and at least that's the silver lining. That we can get much more pleasure in our futures than we've had in our past. And that might be a good place to stop. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming, and I really appreciate your questions and the discussions. Raj will be sticking around to sign some books, and this talk will actually be posted online on the UBC Reads website, so do feel free to watch it again, circulate it to your friends and your classroom. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and that was a fantastic experience.